It's a wild world out there, but some worlds are even wilder. Hi, I'm Tyler Habney, and you're listening to Dungeons and Dystopias. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome back to Dungeons and Dystopias. We are at podcast, I think, number 14 now. I am Tyler Habney. I am your host. I have dungeon mastered over 200 games of Dungeons and Dragons and Cyberpunk Red, and this podcast is an attempt at combining, expertise in the both of them. So thank you very much for listening. This episode is going to be Dungeons and Dragons centered, and today we are going to be talking about yet another part of the Forgotten Realms. That is, I'd say, one of the more relevant areas. We've talked a bit about Baldur's Gate, but there are other cities along the Sword Coast that I'd say have just as much interesting things going on in them as Baldur's Gate had. And one of the biggest of these cities is the city of Waterdeep, which in the Forgotten Realms is basically an equivalent to like a fantasy New York. It's the most technologically advanced area in the Sword Coast, and that's just because it's basically a fantasy metropolis. It is this huge location off of the coast of the Forgotten Realms, or Faerun, and it is, bar none, the most influential city in the northern part of the Sword Coast of the Forgotten Realms there. You'll find most scholars, wizards, famous people within the realms have gone through Waterdeep in some sort of fashion before. It's a very interesting locale. Personally, I have a lot of background with Waterdeep because Waterdeep Dragon Heist was the first mainline book campaign I ran. In fact, it was the first campaign I ran in general. So I started with Waterdeep, and as such, it's sort of a very close sort of setting to me. I happen to think it's one of the more interesting spots in the Forgotten Realms, just because I'm a sucker for a city campaign. I like city campaigns. I don't know. Urban stuff is always fun for me. That's probably why I do so well with Cyberpunk Red and stuff like that. But Waterdeep is a different beast entirely from Night City. It's a fantasy setting. So Night City has a lot of cyberware and technology and, low down crime and a lot of like class disparity. That's not what Waterdeep goes for as much. Waterdeep is sort of your traditional fantasy setting, all packed into a city roughly the size of Manhattan. It all kind of works together. I mean, it's a fantasy city, so it's all sorts of different types of beasts and monsters from all sorts of different backgrounds. And I mean, it's urban fantasy, so that's, in my opinion, some of the best types of fantasy. So you get to see how these people are all interacting and mingling together in a setting where, hardcore discrimination is not exactly a profitable thing to do. So it's just a lot of people kind of melding together, learning to live with each other and abide by the rules that Waterdeep has set up, which, I mean, there's plenty of rules. I mean, they're pretty much your normal stuff. Don't steal, don't kill, don't attack people in the street, stuff like that. And that's all enforced by a code, which if you get Waterdeep Dragon Heist, you can actually get a cool little handout that shows you all of the different laws and punishments, which some of them are pretty crazy. But yeah, I mean, it's got its own sort of law system that's fleshed out. It has all this cool stuff, and we're gonna kind of get into that a little bit. So first things first, a little bit of the history of Waterdeep. Waterdeep started as most cities do, a small sort of trading port on the coast, and eventually kind of built up into, first did a hold called Bloodhand Hold before eventually being renamed to Nimor's Hold. And then after a while, it was just eventually renamed to Waterdeep because it was such a huge city. So Waterdeep is, its government is ruled by a council of 16 different masked lords. And these masked lords are basically nobles who are remaining entirely anonymous. That's so that, they can't be bribed, people can't get to them, they can't be assassinated. No one knows who the other masked lords are except for the masked lords themselves. And even then, they're masked. So it might even be hard to tell for the other masked lords exactly who is helping them run the city. And all of that kind of works to, make sure the city itself is a safer place for all. I guess so the masked lords, very important. They are basically, that can create a lot of interesting situations in a campaign where maybe one of the masked lords winds up being demasked and people find out their identity. And that could cause a whole load of problems depending on who that person's identity is, how accessible they are, and how, how that all kind of goes to be. And a lot of this is also funded by the masked lords themselves, some of which might want to, float rumors about other people being masked lords or something in order to gain political power or whatever. It could be, there's a lot going on there. And that's something you can build off of for a political campaign if you wanted to do one in Waterdeep. Now, talking about law, order, government, we should probably also talk about some of the bigger parts of the city, and that is the factions that call it home. Most factions in the Forgotten Realms have a presence in Waterdeep. Emerald Enclave, the Harpers, classic organizations like that are typically good aligned. But there are also the wonderful people we mentioned before in this podcast, the Zentarum. They are very present in Waterdeep, and they are actively feuding with another Thieves Guild type organization called the Xanathar's Thieves Guild. I believe we've talked about Xanathar's here before, but if not, Xanathar is a beholder. And beholders are crazy. They're known for being pretty crazy. And Xanathar he runs the Thieves Guild. He is beholden to a single goldfish. There's a fun little thing you can play, or fun little adventure where the goldfish dies and you have to replace the goldfish without Xanathar finding out. That's always a fun kind of setup there because, beholders be beholden. We have talked about that before on this podcast, but just a quick reminder. So Xanathar's guild is huge in Waterdeep. And they're not just huge in Waterdeep because they're huge beneath Waterdeep. Because it's not just the city we're talking about here. See, in Waterdeep, there's the Undermountain as well. And boy, oh boy. The Undermountain takes place, it's covered in the 5e adventure Dungeon of the Mad Mage, which covers Hallister Blackcloak and his sort of different things he's been doing in the Undermountain, which is this giant labyrinthian mega dungeon that resides just beneath Waterdeep, accessible through the Yawning Portal Tavern, one of the most famous spots in the Forgotten Realms. There's actually a book of small old classic adventures made for 5e called Tales from the Yawning Portal, and the conceit is it's just bar tales being told at this popular bar in Waterdeep. I don't know. I think that's cute. But the yawning portal is huge because, the yawning portal, the name, is in reference to the giant hole in the center of the tavern in which adventurers use to gain access to Undermountain. The giant, as we mentioned before, mega dungeon, I think it's over 20 floors, that resides beneath Waterdeep. And I believe on the third floor of Waterdeep, going back to Xanathar's Thieves Guild, there's a location called Skullport. And Skullport is essentially a location where the Xanathar's Thieves Guild has, I'd say, a bit more power than Waterdeep. That is, it's a crime-infested hellhole of scum and villainy, as some might call it. Very rough place to be, Skullport, but also, personally, I think a pretty neat spot for a campaign if someone was going to do like a black market type of thing, where you go to Waterdeep during like the day, or maybe you make a legal living in Waterdeep, and then at night or other times you're just slumming it down in Skullport, doing some pretty nasty stuff. So you never know. But yeah, it's just wild to me that there is this city that's already so huge and packed and detailed, and then beneath it you have over 20 floors of a giant mega dungeon that's just as detailed and filled out and has just as much attention paid to it. And there's a lot that goes on in Mad Mage that isn't exactly relevant to Waterdeep, so we're not going to really discuss it here, but still it's mind-boggling, the amount of stuff that goes on in Waterdeep. And we're not even talking about all of the important lore events that have happened in Waterdeep, referring to the Masked Lords and Laurel Silverhand, who's pretty much, I don't want to say the leader of Waterdeep, but she's the kind of the one. She's the public lord, she's not masked, but she's very front-facing in public with her authority. And she's also a pretty good friend of Elminster, that guy we mentioned in the Volo episode. He keeps showing up everywhere. You should get used to hearing his name quite a bit. So yeah, the Zentarum are also there. That's crime. It's pretty crazy. There are a lot of interesting spots in Waterdeep that I think I'd like to talk about. For one, there is an alleyway. I forget what it's called. It's something like Three Knives Alley or something. But essentially, it's every night, knives begin to float and attack people just randomly. There's all these crazy little alleyways that are in Waterdeep that all have this stuff going on. And it's just like, I don't know, it's kind of cool that you could be walking along and then your DM's just suddenly like, hey, it turns out you found your way into Buckle Alley. Or, some of these more famous places like Blacklock Alley or Mouse Alley. I don't know. Interesting spots in Waterdeep that generally just kind of, there's spots you can visit, spots you can have fun. Mert the Moneylender is from Waterdeep, and Mert is a surprisingly important character, all things considered, in D&D. He is one of the original characters. I think he might be the original character from the Forgotten Realms. I believe Ed Greenwood, one of the first stories made for the Forgotten Realms, was Mert traveling around doing crazy stuff because he's Mert, and I'm not gonna lie, he's kind of insane. He's cool. He's a cool character. You should look into Mert. Maybe I'll talk a bit about Mert in the future. But he just kind of vanishes for a while and then he just reappears and just goes back to doing his thing. D&D lore is weird. It's really weird. Yeah, there's just a lot in Waterdeep. All of the businesses and things in the city are broken up into guilds. So, let's say you're going to be owning a business or a home in Waterdeep, and you're going to be putting your trash out on the curb or something. Well, you very well might want to give some, tithe, some payment to the Trash Collectors Guild, or else they might just ignore your home. They might not pick up your trash, or they might even get worse. They might leave trash at your house because you're not paying them. You're not helping them out. So guilds are a huge part of Waterdeep. If you're going to be in any profession, chances are you're going to be in a guild in Waterdeep, which I think is all right. It's basically just a lot of unions. That's okay, I guess. Yeah, it's just a huge city that's technologically advanced. Like I said, to me it looks roughly the size of the island of Manhattan, which is a pretty sizable city, all things considered, for a fantasy setting. So if you're looking for a large metropolis to run your next D&D campaign in, think about Waterdeep. Just think about it. That being said, we're going to move on to the last little bit of our episode today. We're going to move on to our D&D Monster of the Week. And since I've been talking so much about urban settings, I'd like to utilize a monster that I have used in urban settings before. And that is an Otyugh. Now, what is an Otyugh? Well, an Otyugh are these strange creatures. It's hard to exactly describe it, but it's like a rhinoceros without eyes, without a horn, really no nose at all, big mouth with big spiky teeth, tentacles coming out of its torso, and it's all this weird, uncomfortable flesh color. All of it. That's an Otyugh. They also stand around 8 feet wide or large. They're very large creatures. And why am I talking about Otyughs? Well, how do they fit into an urban setting? More importantly, well, let me tell you, Otyughs, their main diet is not. I mean, they can't eat meat, they can't eat whatever, but their main diet is waste. It's junk, trash, poopy. They are in love with filth. They love eating things, just the most terrible shit that they could find. And that's sort of how you feed an Otyugh. So when you are in a city, like in D&D, and you're in the sewers, there's a decent chance, if the city has a bit of a problem, that you might find an Otyugh. And here's the best part about Otyughs. They're capable of speech. You could talk to them. They aren't just these crazed creatures. No, you can have a conversation with an Otyugh. So what kind of things might an Otyugh talk to you about? Well, one thing they're known to do is actually make deals with people in exchange for waste and more food. So, you might be able to convince an Otyugh to let you pass by or whatever if you feed him some of the garbage from your bag or, all sorts of things that the Otyugh might find enjoyable. But what a weird creature. Do not get bitten by an Otyugh. These guys are a vector for about 5 million diseases, if you couldn't tell. And the reason we're talking about Otyugh specifically in the Waterdeep episode is that they have been specifically named as creatures that do inhabit the sewers of Waterdeep. So, more specifically, if you're going into the Waterdeep sewers, expect to run into an Otyugh. I know I'd be pretty scared. All right. That'll be it for us today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Dungeons and Dystopias. My name is Tyler Hapney. I've been your host. I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening.